What effect do these simple sugars have on the zone 1, zone 2 adaptations?
So all that work when we started with in the beginning of the podcast, talking about zone 1, 2, we talked about the stressed individual that the heart rate is, soaring high. And now you're throwing sugar at that. You're ruining all of that work that you're kind of doing because sugar is a stress. The body is not accustomed to having sugar, and its response is actually the heightened heart rate.
Welcome to the Athlete's Compass podcast. Each week, renowned sports scientist and founder of Athletica AI, Dr. Paul Laursen, athlete, coach, and sports scientist Marjaana Rakai, and coach and cyclist Paul Warloski discuss training, racing, and improving your health and fitness. Get ready for your journey to peak performance. Hello and welcome to the Athlete's Compass podcast, where we navigate training, fitness, and health for everyday athletes. A research paper by Muniz came out this month showing that fast marathon runners did a lot more volume than slow marathon runners. This is not surprising. What was interesting is that nearly all of the extra volume was in zone 1 of a 3-zone model. We'll link to the study in the show notes. And in episode 53, we talked about the importance of building a base of fitness primarily by training in that easy endurance zone 1 and 2. And that's in the 5-zone model that we'll refer to in the rest of the podcast. So, Paul, can you remind us, in episode 53, we talked about this. What physiological adaptations occur in zone 1 and 2, and how do they improve endurance? How could they make these faster runners fast by going slow?
Yeah, well, it comes down to fat metabolism at the end of the day, and that's really what that is doing. Like aerobic, mitochondrial building, fat metabolism. These are the key things that you get with training volume. So that's what's going on. That's why you want to be spending the majority, like that 80-20 rule. You want to be spending 80% of your training in that lower zone 1 or 2 of a 5-zone model, right? So that's we spoke a lot about that before, but it's a key fundamental piece of your training program puzzle.
So how does that fat oxidation support faster running, especially in longer events?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Ingvild Oden on the Training Science podcast, she did this cool study, and we might have spoken about it on that base one. But basically, what she showed likewise that she had these 2 groups of Norwegian cyclists, and they measured VO2 in every single training session across many, many, many weeks. The study would have taken them 2 years to do, and they do these in these Norwegian sports schools. It's amazing. But anyways, after all the data was quantified, what they showed was she split them down the middle. And there was a group that adapted and there was a group that didn't adapt. And the group that adapted to the HIIT sessions was the group that had performed more training volume, and specifically more training volume in zone 1, actually, of the 5-zone model. So easy training, right? And it wasn't a heap more, but it was close to 2 hours more than the other group, right? And even just that extra 2 hours of training. Imagine just doing like one extra 90-minute to 2-hour session of aerobic training. That was enough to support the greater adaptation to HIIT training that these cyclists got, and it was notable, right? Like, so if you want to make gains in your high intensity interval training, you want to have that baseline level of base behind it. And it's the same with the finding that Paul's describing with that new sort of landmark study that came out with very high sample size. That it's the same sort of thing. Like, you want to have the big training volume, More training volume means better fat adaptation, means more mitochondria, and it means enhanced VO2 max. Remember back a study I did with Steven Seiler, we showed that basically higher VO2 maxes were related to greater fat metabolism. And that doesn't get talked about a lot. Usually people think, oh, high intensity exercise, got to be carbohydrate based, right? No, that wasn't the case. In the group it was Steven Seiler and I's, where they were the high volume group, like the well trained elite athletes, they had the higher VO2 maxes in relation to high volume of training behind them, more training sessions, and the fat metabolism explained the VO2 max, not the carbohydrate metabolism. So that's why, that's what we want to focus on. Protect your base sessions, protect your zone 1 and 2 training. It's instrumental. Not that the other stuff isn't important, but yeah, like the science and the data is just so clear now.
Oftentimes you see beginner athletes and even intermediate athletes who haven't done a lot of training. They just, when they start running or cycling, their heart rates just shoot up straight to zone 3. Why does that happen?
Because they're stressed and they don't have the adaptations on board to meet the physiological demands, the physical demands, right? So the only way they can meet those demands is through a sympathetic response, a stressful response. So the body is working so hard to meet the demand that's being placed on it, right? So they kind of go out there and they're like, I'm going to grind my way through this. And it shouldn't be that way, right? When we coach, we're trying to coach through calm, zone 1, 2 training, breathe through your nose. You want it to be easy, right? And by doing that, you're keeping that stress really, really low, right? This is classic Phil Maftone MAF training. So or classic zone 2 training. That's the way you want to go about your process. So make sure, like, hit training and grinding and no pain, no gain. Maybe it's got a place as one session, but the majority just has to be calm. And if you're patient, you will see the gains slowly over time. Marjaana's smiling at me and she's like, you weren't always so patient, were you, Marjaana?
No, but it's so funny that we're talking about this because this is exactly where I was 3 years ago.
Yes, you were. But you learned.
I learned, but yeah, so it was really hard. I came from overtraining, so I had fried myself. And you told me to go really slow, really slow, and do walk-run methods. But what are you looking at? Like, what kind of signs are you looking for? Let's just say, what signs were you looking for when I came to you and told me to slow down?
The first one is the exact one that you described right off the bat. Your heart rate just goes skyward right off the bat. You don't have that because you think like exercise is interpreted by your body as a stressful moment versus something that you're just working through. Like, so we needed to get a hold of that stress and just do the walk runs first, right? You got to walk before you run. Mm-hmm. So it's the hardest thing to do, right? Is just to go slow in the beginning. And like you just have to dampen the sympathetic stress. Remember, there's 2 divisions of the central nervous system, the autonomic nervous system, the fight or flight system, right? That's to protect us and save us. And then the calming parasympathetic system to relax us. So of course, any sort of exercise will trigger a little bit of a sympathetic stress to push us up, but it shouldn't be like, extreme, right? Where you're constantly in massive fight or flight. Like there's kind of a degree that you need there's different levels of the engine that you should push, the throttle, right? So you only want to move the throttle into gear 1 and 2, right? Let's just call it the same with the zones. and you want the zone 1 and 2 throttle just really working, like a diesel and humming that engine, and just kind of grinding along. And you don't want it to go into zone 4 and 5. And that's what you were kind of having to do when you started out with me, right? That was just the way you went about things. You pushed always towards those really harder zones. And yeah, that had to change, and we changed it and made a difference, right?
Oh, total game changer. And there's a lot of it, like a lot of the low intensity sessions, and I had to be really mindful what I was doing. Take off ear pods, don't listen to music that would hype me up and push me to go harder. Like it was like 3 hour ride, and I had to just be with my own thoughts and just calm myself down instead of like, oh, I feel good, let's go hard. uh, so that was a really important learning journey for sure.
I just started working with a 19-year-old kid who's got some talent, and he just got a trainer, and he's on Zwift, and all he wants to do is climb Alpe Zwift, whatever the Alpe
Help to
Zwift,
us.
Alpe d'Huez,
Yeah.
and that's all he wants to do. He just wants to go hard up that hill all the
Yeah.
time, and it's like,
Yeah.
no, we're gonna go slow. We got to go slow. We got to go slow, and it's a learning process.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then the Norwegians call this intensity control, right? And that's what your 19-year-old phenom doesn't quite have yet. That's what you're trying to teach him. And yeah, when you get that intensity control, then you give the appropriate signals, and under a sort of a calm nervous system, and you adapt optimally. And again, this go check out the results on or the forum on Athletica for the 2024 results. I mean, reflecting on that year 2024, it's just phenomenal to go back through that and read through all those comments and read through all the epiphanies ultimately that people are describing, much like Marjaana just did. This is what we're all about. This is what we're here to do. And 2025, the goal is to have more and more of these.
So, how does training even in zone 3? How does that limit progress, and what are some of the telltale signs in performance or in recovery?
Yeah. Well, back to Steven Seiler. He was the first one that did a study that showed this. He used heart rate variability in this study, and this was he did it in a couple groups. One was a really well trained group, and one was a not so well trained group. But what he really showed was he did 4 sets of exercise. One was just like a zone 2 for 1 hour. Second was zone 2 for 2 hours. Third was zone 3, and last one was like a HIIT session. And what he showed was that in these well-trained athletes was that when they did 1 hour of zone 2, no heart rate variability response. 2 hours of zone 2, no heart rate variability response. Just easy, no problem. 1 or 2 hours of zone 3, big sympathetic response. And HIIT session, big sympathetic response. So basically, even though that zone 3, if you know zone 3, this is like tempo. That zone 3, even though it was still, you can still talk through it, all these sorts of things, it was still stressful. The body still interpreted it as stress. So you can imagine the scenario. This is what Stephen was trying to prove when he was really proving the Norwegian method. If you're always in that zone 3 and you always drift into zone 3 where you can still talk, and you can still hang out with a group that might be faster than you, if you keep doing that time and time again, it just adds to the exact same stress as you would achieve or if you were doing a HIIT session. Imagine doing HIIT sessions, that's all you're doing. Well, zone 3 is kind of like, as far as the body is aware, it interprets it the same as a stress, a heavy stress. Whereas you can, because consistency of training and, always signaling the body to adapt, that we know that's what you want to do, that can be done so much better with the aerobic training, the zone 1 and 2 work. So do as much zone 1 and 2 work as you want, but limit the amount of training in the zone 3 and above.
So if a listener suspects they need more aerobic work, what changes do they need to make in their training? I guess this depends on what phase they are in.
Yeah, it probably does. Yeah. I mean, if you're in a build phase, think about it, you can see the race on the horizon and you're preparing for it. But if you can't really see the race on the horizon and you're just going through to train, then you should use the workout wizard on Athletica, or if you're not on Athletica, you should switch it up to a zone 2 kind of training session, right? So that's what you should do. Like, just be mindful of how much high intensity training is in your training diet in any given week.
So we talked about run walk or walk run, but is there other practical advice that you talked about that control of intensity? How can we help athletes, everyday athletes, control their intensity and stay in the correct zones? I mean, what's the practical advice? I mean, go slow.
For sure, but we have lots of tools, and we use many of the tools in Athletica. But some of the tools, off the top of my head, would be, use a heart rate monitor. That's a great one to have a look at. If you know your zones in Athletica, you want these to be in around the zone 1 to 2 on the 5-zone model. You want your rating of perceived exertion, how your brain feels. You want that to be, you want it to feel easy, easy to moderate, and you wouldn't really want to push above that. And then there's something else on Athletica called the feel. A session can feel good and it can feel not so good, right? And how that session feels in terms of your interpretation of it also matters too, right? You want these sessions to feel good. It's like, oh yeah, I felt good to do that. And then there's other factors too that stimulate the usage of the parasympathetic system over the sympathetic system. Like, for example, if you're walking, if you can want to try to cover your mouth and breathe through your nose. And for whatever reason, I think it's James Nestor, the book Breathe. There's just there's a parasympathetic stimulation when we breathe through our nose. And you can do that whilst you're exercising, while you're riding a bike, like, Paul would coach on a zone 1 sort of session, or out there doing a walk run. And maybe you do a walk run and you only run until you can't breathe through your nose anymore. And then that would be almost like your stimulus to get back towards walking. Like, that would be a really good sort of intro set. And then maybe as you develop and build, you get more and more time where you can breathe through your nose when you're actually running. And then that would be an indicator that you're probably improving and able to the parasympathetic system is sort of working better, and you're probably adapting better in terms of your fat metabolism. That'd be a good little coaching moment potentially for coaches and their athletes.
So we established the importance of base work and lots of zone 1 and 2. In Athletica that I'm using to train for my gravel races next year, I had a really short base period. It was just a couple of, I think, 1 block, and I jumped right into a long build phase. How does Athletica help athletes individualize their programs to ensure they get enough aerobic base training?
Yeah, that's a great question, Paul. And we get some chatter about this one on the forum sometimes. And really, at this point in the game, in terms of the algorithms that are behind Athletica and when it's determining when you get a base phase versus when you get a build phase, is really proximity to the event itself, right? So Athletica thinks that if you plug in a race on a given date, well, within about 8 to 10 weeks thereabouts, we're going to work on building up for that event, right? We're going to train you with specific training that's probably going to be of a higher exercise intensity to prepare you for the stress that's about to occur, right? That's the whole goal. That's what it's trying to optimize for. So if all of a sudden you plug in a race and it's in March, well, March is just around the corner, right? And kind of like to your point, within one week of base, we're already sort of into building phases because we've got an event right in front of us that we've got to prepare for. Conversely, if you had your event in August, Athletica is going to give you months of base training to adapt. So it really, at this point in the game, it all depends on the proximity of that race and where it's coming up. So if you're racing in March, in the Northern Hemisphere, and it's okay, I don't think I need to start building in that one for a while. You got to kind of manually override things, and you would be wise to go in there and adjust the volume of your training, go down to low or mid volume, depending on where you want to be. Use train to maintain, which you'll just be flipping around mostly in base phases, which is, probably what you want. Or you can also use, if you go to the overview page and look at the race and all the dates, the weeks, the dates that are kind of down on your overview, and you can look at your roadmap, and you click on one of those dates, you can actually swap it to a recovery week. So there's nothing wrong with just, clicking on 5 more recovery weeks in a row, changing all those build weeks to recovery weeks. So you have full control. Your context more than Athletica does. Remember that, you and your coach. So, don't be afraid of overriding some of the things based on common sense. Always let common sense guide your decisions. The three of us, Paul and Marjaana, thank you so much for your help in guiding our athletes to work towards really, trusting their own intuition around what's best for them. And that's, we're constantly doing that. And, because I think naturally we get this feedback a lot. We want to think sometimes the AI must know more than us, right? Well, it's an AI coach. It should. ChatGPT is so smart and all the like, but don't let that go. Don't let your feel go. Don't let your wisdom go, and your grasp on common sense. Athletica can't beat you in your brain. So if the little man or woman in your head is saying that doesn't really make sense, trust it and make the swap, make the change. 9 times out of 10, you are right and Athletica is wrong. All right. So, and of course, always use the forum or our help desk, and we're always happy to help you if you are in doubt. But yeah, you're probably right. Is the message I want to make clear.
If you're in doubt, reach out.
If you're in doubt, reach out. Yes.
Yeah, that's what the forum's for.
Yeah, and I'd like to add, like, if you have several races, don't be afraid to take a little extra recovery after your first race. Like last year, I had April race and then I had August race, and I would have been like if I was listening to Athletica, I would have been building again to the second race in August right after, but I knew I needed to recover first. So I don't exactly remember what I did. I don't think I changed the plan, but I just did my own thing for a couple of weeks and recovered from the first race. So if you have several races, just know that you should probably do a recovery or train to maintain it in between before you go back to build.
Yep.
Or if you're sick or you travel and you miss a week, start with the base week if you can, or recovery week.
For sure. Paul said something that was, I need to go back to as well. He said, that's what the forum is for. And it is amazing how many experts we have on that forum now. It's just some really quality individuals. Some are ambassadors, some are coaches. It is just quite the group that we have on there. And I just want to thank everyone for the work that they do, because it's saving so much work for me, which I can't get to anyways. So yeah, I just want to say how appreciative I am of all the expert coaches and experts that are kind of chiming in there. Like I'm reading all the comments and I'm just going, oh yeah, yeah, oh that person knows their stuff. That's great advice. Like there's just the quality that we have on there is phenomenal. And so yeah, to Paul's point, if you've got a doubt or query, push it into the forum and watch what happens. It will, it'll get answered by the appropriate expert, and you'll get on your way.
Yeah, it's pretty cool to watch. Like I've actually started to wait a little bit because I know that somebody will reply and they're so helpful. It's just amazing. It has taken its own life.
One of the
Yeah,
things that I have done as well with Athletica's training plan with the base is that on days that are, more zone 3 heavy, more interval heavy in my build phase, if I'm not feeling it, I just make those an endurance day. And, that's what I do with the athletes. It's like you can always, like Paul said, you can always add more endurance into your days. You can always add more zone 1 and zone 2. And if you're thinking that it's too much for doing a zone 3 ride, doing some tempo, then don't do it. Do the endurance riding and that or running, and that is going to be more beneficial in the long run.
agree. And the other thing you can look at too is if you're on the Garmin, sorry, yeah, you're on the Garmin system, you've got like one of the more newer Garmin products. Check out your heart rate variability and the recovery profile, and Athletica does a very good job of letting you know and interpreting as well. Check out that new coach avatar and what the coach avatar is actually saying if you go to that recovery profile. And it usually will tell you whether you're good to go on that kind of harder session, or if you should just, like Paul said, just switch that up to an aerobic development session. And if feel and your HRV are right in line, then you've done the right thing, right? Like that's just you almost have to go the easy session or have to go to the aerobic session for that. Yeah.
Cool. We saved a listener question to last this time. We have a question from Faisal. I don't know how to say his name. This
Oh
is
yeah.
from the forum. A highly trained master cyclist observed high glucose and A1C levels and wondered if this could be linked to exercise-induced insulin resistance. Is this a potential outcome of high-volume endurance training? And what can athletes do to manage it?
Well, that's I would go back and review the Mickey Willenden podcast. Also the one that Mickey and I did on the Fast Talk Labs podcast. We can include those in the show notes. But generally, so if you let's just interpret this question a little bit more. So if you have a high glucose, usually you're getting that from like a continuous blood glucose monitor, so you can kind of see that it's elevated across the day, as opposed to just a single blood glucose marker that might just be randomly high. High hemoglobin A1C's levels basically mean you've got like a chronically high blood glucose marker. So these are good indications that glucose in general is high in your daily life. Is it exercise-induced insulin resistance? I wouldn't phrase it that way. I don't think exercise per se is what's going to be causing an insulin resistance. I would think it's more, sugar and high carb, which is the high insulin resistance trigger, not the exercise. Exercise should, in theory, lower that. Remember that exercise actually opens up the muscles and allows blood glucose to kind of be absorbed or diffused into it. So I would just take the exercise word out of that. I would say it's more of a sugar or carbohydrate issue. In other words, it's just like the whole load of that carbohydrate is just too high, and it's around all of the cells in the body, and that's why this gene marker in the hemoglobin itself, right, is elevated. So what can you do to manage it is the question. Well, go back and listen to probably actually one of our I think it was like, if it's not the most popular podcast, it was one of the most popular podcasts from 2024, and it was the one that we did on low carbohydrate nutrition. So that is really that is your ticket, and that's the experience that all three of us here have really had in some degree or another, to really just feel the benefits of reducing carbohydrate and incorporating more quality fat, more and higher protein levels ultimately in our diets, and alongside of the training and whatnot. So yeah, those are yeah, I'm making sure that's how you'd manage it. You would, yeah, you basically, you want to stop your sugar eating, and you want to really focus on quality nutrients in the diet. Like, imagine being a Tour de France cyclist back in the 80s or something like that, right? Or, like, we didn't have gels back then. Sure, there'd be could probably find a gas station, have a Coca-Cola or whatnot, but, like, it was more old school. Like, think of 60s, 70s and whatnot, right? Like, they weren't fueling that way. They were,
No.
but it's now become just so accepted. Like, you've got to, for some reason, well, marketing, right? I guess marketing kind of pushes it in there, and yeah, like, that's the only way. The only way is to fuel that ride with a gel, which is just sugar.
Yeah, and some companies market it pretty aggressively, like uh, improve your endurance or run new PR, drink our products, and no,
No.
it's very aggressive marketing.
Yeah.
So, what effect do these simple sugars have on the zone 1, zone 2 adaptations? How do they directly affect the fat metabolism and oxidation that happens?
That is question of the week, that's for sure. And that's the answer, is they blunt the response. So all that work, when we started with in the beginning of the podcast, talking about zone 1, 2 work, the importance of that. And, we talked about the stressed individual, that the heart rate is, soaring high. And we talked about how you kind of had to bring everything back to kind of calm parasympathetic. And now you're throwing sugar at that. You're ruining all of that work that you're kind of doing, because sugar is a stress. The body is not accustomed to having sugar, and its response is actually the heightened heart rate. Prove it to yourself, actually. Like, take the next time you're monitoring your heart rate and you have the opportunity to have a big bolus of sugar, in whatever format that may be, monitor your vital signs, and you'll see that your body rebels to that, and it's a stress in the body, and the heart rate is elevated as a result. So that's what you don't want, right? So this is back to, we've talked about this before with Phil Maftone, unhealthy athlete, discussions, right? Like, this is what's causing the unhealthiness, right? Like, you get this hypothalamic hypothalamic pituitary adrenal response. Basically, your whole, from the brain to the nervous system to the endocrine system, they're all attached. And if you have that sugar, it's a stressor, and it's just like, it adds to the whole stress cascade, and you blunt your ability to adapt to your training. So don't do that.
So, I have learned a lot in this episode, and here are three things there are more than three things in this episode, but because this is what we talk about in this episode of zone 1 and 2 is so much of what I talk about with my athletes, so much of what we talk about in this podcast with good health. But number one, what is one of the most important adaptations from zone 1 and zone 2 endurance training is improved fat oxidation, which allows us to train on fat stores rather than glycogen. It's not either or, but that's the idea, is that we're trying to improve our fat metabolism. Number two, the base season, riding and running in zone 1 and 2 is a great opportunity to clean up our diets and habits to support more of that kind of training. So go slow, use a heart rate monitor, rely on your RPE. These rides and runs and workouts should feel easy, and you should be able to nose breathe. And number three, too much reliance on simple sugars during training can really blunt the effect of endurance training, because the body ends up relying on carbohydrates instead of fats, and we're trying to do the opposite. So you don't need to fuel your training with simple sugars. Yeah, that just seems like the beginning of what we got here. But that is all for this week. Join us next week on the Athletes Compass podcast. Ask your training questions in the comments or on our social media. When you finish this episode and you enjoy it, we'd appreciate it when you take a moment to give us a 5-star review. For more information or to schedule a consultation with Paul, Marjaana, or myself, check the links in the show notes. For Marjaana Rakai and Dr. Paul Laursen, I am Paul Warloski, and this has been the Athletes Compass podcast. Thank you so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed another episode of the Athletes Compass podcast, your North Star through the sometimes complicated world of training for your endurance sport. We appreciate your comments and training questions and your 5-star reviews. For a deeper dive into the science of endurance sports, listen to the Training Science podcast and check out the adaptive AI training platform Athletica.ai. Thanks for listening.